Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that began when the pandemic did. The purpose was to link readers, writers, and indie bookstores all together. And basically it was to say, screw you to the pandemic. We're going to keep going and being literary. So first I want to say that we have an amazing guest here today, Adrienne Brodeur. I've loved her work since Wild Game, which was one of my favorite books ever. And this book, I just told Adrienne in our green room, which really isn't green at all, that I read it twice. The first time because I was just so lost in the story, and the second time to get my questions and also to figure out how she did what she did. It's just beautifully written. So those of you out there, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Don't be shy at all. I've already put stuff in the chat so you can order her book and Wall Game at bookshop.org or at your favorite indie bookstore or wherever books are sold, whatever you want to do. Again, don't be shy. So Adrienne Brodeur is the author of the memoir Wild Game, My Mother, Her Lover, and Me, which was described by the New York Times Book Review as exquisite and harrowing. The book is so gorgeously written and deeply insightful, and with a line of narrative tension that never slacks from the first page to the last. Wild Game's film rights were bought with a Nick Hornby attached to adapt, and the director of Mustang attached to direct. Wild Game was a national bestseller. It also earned wild acclaim, rightfully so. It was the best book of 2019 by NPR, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, People, BuzzFeed, Real Simple, and Kirkus Reviews, among others. Her publishing career began with founding the fiction magazine Zoetrope, All Story with Francis Ford Coppola. The magazine won the prestigious National Magazine Award for Best Fiction 4 times. In 2005, she became an editor at Harcourt, where she acquired and edited literary fiction and memoir. She left publishing to become creative director and later executive director of Aspen Words, which we're going to talk about a little later, which is a literary arts nonprofit and program of the Aspen Institute. In 2017, as if she wasn't already a fabulous literary citizen, she launched the Aspen Words Literary Prize, a $35,000 annual award for an influential work of fiction that illuminates a vital contemporary issue and demonstrates the transformative power of literature on thought and culture. So her new novel, Little Monsters, is already racking up the raves, says the Washington Post. Brodeur has indeed crafted a consummate summer read with Little Monsters, which somehow evokes smooth beach glass and hot pink sunsets, with nary a mention of either. At the same time, she's added notes of appealing complexity with elaborate sibling relationship that recalls famous literary siblings like Franny and Zoe Glass, or the sisters in Marilyn Robinson's Housekeeping. Everyone loves this book, from the New York Times right on down. So Little Monsters is the story of the Gardner family, siblings Ken and Abby, who were raised by their brilliant father, Adam, in a remote part of Cape Cod. They all have fraught relationships, and it's all set against the backdrop of the 2016 elections, Me Too, Hillary Clinton, family tensions, and a new arrival brings many surprises. I want to say again that this book is a masterwork, and I think everybody should go to bookshop.org. Right now, the link's right there, and you can just click on it, and you'll have the book ordered before we're even done speaking. Adrienne, welcome so much. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. That was like the most amazing introduction ever.
Well, thank you. So first, I have so much to talk about this book. First, I want to talk about the title, Little Monsters, which isn't just what Adam called his kids. It's also the title of a painting. I don't want to give away too much, but the title is just so evocative that I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about it, what you can, without telling us the whole plot.
I mean, what I love a title that has more than one meaning, which I'm sure many of us do. That's what I love so much about Wild Game, which was an easier title to have landed on. But Little Monsters was actually the working title for the book. And what I loved about it was that it was, it was the pet name that the patriarch had for his children. But it also, there's so many little monsters in the book, and they're little monsters,
Yes.
but they're just these, whether it's sort of microaggressions or whatever the mood of that time in the country, there were just a lot of monsters around. And
Yes.
initially, it wasn't a sure thing that this was going to be the title at all. Initially, my publishing house wasn't a huge fan of it. And so I spent a year I was rewriting the book and figuring things out, and, test driving every, bad whale metaphor you can ever imagine as a title, so many, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of titles. And then, my editor showed me the book jacket, and there it was. And I was kind of like, whoa, I didn't think. And she's like, I know, but it's actually right. So we just went with it in the end.
It's perfect. It's it's what I call a "don't you can't look away" title. You hear little monsters and instantly you think, oh, this is going to be interesting, isn't it? And it's just a great, great title. So in Wild Game, you wrote about an inappropriate mother-daughter relationship where you were involved in your mom's affair. Here too, the family dynamics and friendship dynamics are fascinating, weird, tangled up, and bizarre, and again, you can't look away from them. Do you consider that family dynamics is the landscape that you want to write in?
It does appear to
I
be
hope so.
I am writing in, but it was really pretty thrilling to step away from my own family, and because I did spend a long time in that world when I was writing Wild Game. And even though this is a complicated family too, and everything else, the dynamics are so different. It's such a different family. I had enough of mother-daughter, so I focused on a patriarch and two adult children and sort of tough sibling relationships. But I'm hopelessly fascinated by families and dynamics, and the complexities. And if you, I think most families are complicated. And if you really shine a spotlight on it and see the deeper truth inside and really do it with compassion, I don't know. I think it's very interesting, because I think most of us would agree that we all have wounds from childhood. And I think it's only if you actually look at those wounds and get past them, that you can move on. And I think a lot of people do, and a lot of people don't. And so here in this family, you have some people who do and some people who don't.
There's a great quote in the book. I forget who says it, but it's the wounded wound, which is exactly right. It's so much of what we do in our present is based on what happened in our past, especially when we're young. And sometimes we don't know it. So I want to talk about the Cape. Somebody reminded me that only people who live in Boston around the Cape call it the Cape. Everybody else calls it Cape Cod. But anyway, there's Cape Cod has a certain mystique about it. And I was wondering if you live part-time on the Cape. Yep. And I was wondering if in writing this book, that story world of the Cape changed for you and you began to see it differently or feel yourself differently within it.
Well, I mean, the Cape is such a dynamic place and such a place that's always changing. So I feel like, if I wrote a book about it set in Cape Cod right now, it would be a very different book than either Wild Game or Monsters. And I think one of the intriguing things when you're, from places other than Massachusetts and you think of the Cape is this one thing, this,
it's not though.
This arm. And whereas people who've been here and know these towns and how different the landscape from Hyannis to Provincetown, or
it's totally different.
It's totally different. And these towns have as much, I'd say Provincetown has as much in common with Chatham as like Las Vegas does with Boston. I mean, they are different worlds. So
right. It is.
So
it is. And so Abby is the artist. She's the square peg in the round holes of her family. She also had another great quote that I love, that a painting is like a novel unfolding. And I took it to mean that you find the meaning that matters to you personally. The more you look at it, the more you experience that painting. So first, am I wrong about that? And second of all, how own novels unfold for you? Do you find that as you're writing them, the meaning unfolds for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a big question. First of all, I absolutely agree with sort of what you said, the first part of the question. I think no two people look at the same painting, no
That's
two
right.
people read the same book. That's the really interesting part is, especially when you go out with a new book, the book you wrote, but you
Oh,
have no idea about the
oh
person
yeah.
else. And it's fascinating. It's just really interesting. Um, Wait, what was the second part of the question now?
Oh, what did I ask you? Oh, do your own novels unfold for you as you're writing them? Do you like get to the end of the novel and then realize, oh my God, I know what I was writing about, but I really was writing about this other deeper thing that just revealed itself to me.
I mean, I think every book presents itself so differently, but I feel like, at least for me, I definitely have a concept. I'm writing towards something, but it's like you grip it, but not too tightly because you need to let it do its own thing. And so it absolutely unfolds, but it's a bit of leading and following at the same time. I mean, I'm sure you
Right.
have that experience as well. I feel like what I initially think it's going to be is what it's going to be, but there is always much, much more because, when you're starting, sort of like the tip of the iceberg of the book. And then
Right.
right forward, you're building this universe that no one probably knows about but you, but it can, take a lot of different shapes.
I want to talk about Ken and Adam. Adam is a brilliant marine biologist, but he's also bipolar, and he's not always taking his medication the way he should. And you know what? I'm going to separate that into questions. So let's talk about Adam first. So what I wanted to know is Adam is sort of horrible, but he's also sort of sympathetic too, because you understand him. So I wanted to know, like, how difficult was it to get this right?
Weirdly, Adam was the character who came most easily to me. And I know that
Really?
no,
Wow.
but honestly, I hope I ever have this experience again in my writing career. Literally, I could practically put my fingers over and he spoke to me. And when I was an editor and people talked about like their character speaking to them, I wanted to just boom, like I was just like,
Really?
stop it, like don't say that. And yet that's exactly
That's
how
what
it happened with
happens.
Adam. It just he no one shows up fully for him, but he was very, I could hear his voice, and we know people like this, these charming,
Mm-hmm.
appropriate men of a certain age that
Right.
they can kind of get away with so much more simply because of that. And he is lovable and incorrigible at the same time. I mean,
Right.
um, he's a fun, difficult, cranky old guy.
And he's fascinating to read about, just fascinating. So let's move on to Ken, who also is, Ken is sort of right wing. He can appreciate climate change only when it, ruins some kind of thing that has to do with money and him and property and this kind of stuff.
Right.
His main desire is to be, the main person, but we can't help but feel for him too. And I wanted to know if you could talk about how I've always said that you can have unsympathetic characters as long as we understand them and they're not complete black and white stereotypes. But I wanted to know how you went about creating these characters that they do bad things, but we still would follow them anywhere because we want to know what they're doing.
Well, I mean, with Ken, I actually feel probably more compassion towards Ken than anyone else in the book, simply because he is the most wounded character. I mean, this
Right.
man who lost his mother when he was a little boy. His father was unreliable at best. There were women coming and going as sort of these quasi mothers. And then he got terribly over-attached to his sister, who ultimately was just like, hey, I'm a teenager, I'm doing my
Right.
thing. And so he's someone who, by his circumstances and very traumatic childhood, has never really been able to kind of get past those things. And so he's built up these masks and he's built up this sort of fortress of a house, and he's trying to present himself in a certain way. And yet, he's
He's wounded. He's wounded.
wounded. And I feel like Yeah, so, I mean, the trick to what you're talking about is, you're figuring out ways to show it that aren't obvious and, and revealing it from different angles and those
Right.
things. And hopefully by the end of the book, we have seen a little bit more vulnerability in Ken. I mean, he does some terrible things, and then, he's trying in his own way.
I know. I know. I know. And I loved to read about him. I want to talk about, you said in an interview, and I love this, that you needed a solid scaffolding to
Yeah.
write, which goes into the whole annoying conversation writers have about whether you wait for the muse, if you're a pantser or a plotter. And I hate both those words because I don't think that's how you really write a novel, and I don't think you can just sit there and wait for the muse. But I'd love it if you talk about how you go about writing your novel. Does it start with an idea? Does it start with a
Right.
character? Do you outline, or do you just have a question that you think you want to ask?
Yeah, no, I'll talk about all of it. I missed one thing you said, a blanker or a plotter? A what?
A pantser, like you're sitting on
Oh,
your. I hate that word. It's like you're. I guess you're by the seat of your pants. You're just like spewing out words,
yeah.
and it's going to become a novel.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I feel like I go through a long period of time where I'm just thinking about what I want to write about. And I spend a lot of time, I'll take notes and stuff and fill pages, but I'm mostly just like right now, while the tour is winding down and I haven't started anything new, I really try to notice what I'm thinking about. So I remember when I started thinking about this book, it was during COVID. I'd just been sent back up from the Wild Game tour. And I noticed my head landing in places, and part of it was
right.
2016 and a fascination with the weird moodiness of that time and what
Yep.
was going on. Again, I spent those months on Cape Cod, which I think is probably why I wanted to set the book on the Cape. But it was really just sort of this fascination with sibling dynamics and how two people who grow up in the same home can be such different creatures, and sort of then exploring. So I guess I had, I did all that thinking. Then when I actually get to the writing, I'll say I'm more intuitive than plotter. Like I don't actually write out an extensive outline, but I do have a clear idea of what I'm working towards. So with this book, again, since I'd been looking into sibling dynamics, I had read Cain and Abel and found nothing because it's like a sentence and a half.
You said it was 3 sentences or
I mean,
something.
it's like, it's like, yeah, there's nothing to that story, but I did find the structure there. So I realized from there, I thought, okay, moving towards this party. And once I had, I sort of was locking in on the characters. Like, I don't think there's one thing that starts. Like, there was some situation, there were some characters. Then you're sort of thinking, what would the characters do? And,
Right.
fell in love with whale. I mean, I am in love with whales. So I basically wanted to give the characters all things I wish I could do instead of write, like marine biologist, paint, real estate mogul. I don't know.
By the way, did you see the article in the Times today about this woman who was swallowed by a whale, and she said it was super cool?
I did not see that, but
Oh my God, I have to. She was kayaking, and she said it happened very fast. And all of a sudden, she was in the whale's mouth, and she was looking around, and she could see the sea. And then the whale closed his mouth, and she thought, "Uh-oh, I don't have a lot of time to hold my breath." Then the whale opened the mouth and spit her out. But she said it was just a great experience.
I will have to rush and do that. But when I finished my first draft of this book, I literally was having one of those moments where I was like, okay, show me a sign. Should I just send this to my editor or not? What should I do? And then my phone lit up with basically the same story, but a guy in Provincetown, a diver, had been swallowed by a humpback whale and spit out. I was like, okay, that's all the news.
Oh my God, do they know why they spit them out?
Well, first of all, the humpback whales, now I'll get into my whale talk. I mean,
Okay, they probably just take plankton,
they
right?
they couldn't swallow a person if they
Oh,
wanted to.
okay.
So they've got the baleen, and they just immediately realize, like, huh, this is not krill. And then they just, they're not
Oh,
trying.
I love it. Okay, so how weird was it or difficult was it to go from memoir to novel?
Memoir is a lot harder sort of emotionally and in terms of publishing, but a novel is much harder to write because obviously for the very obvious reasons, memoir, the point of view, basically your story. I mean, there's a lot of shaping and work done, but all the elements, the characters, you still have to do more research on them, but there's no great shocks in writing a memoir. Whereas when you're writing a novel, I mean, you start with absolutely nothing. And
Right.
every character, every scene, every moment, anything can change. You can stub your toe, you can get pregnant, you can die. And what point of view? I mean, there's just so much to think about. And it's sort of, I feel like it's a little bit like, you're trying to capture a dream as you keep thinking about these things. And then, of course, for either of them, when you're in the moment and fully in the writing, I mean, that's
That's the bliss.
when
That's the
every
bliss.
single thing you hear or see or smell, just feeds into your imagination. And that weird logic your
Yeah.
subconscious has that sort of directs you.
So you were an editor for a long time.
Yeah.
Is it different looking at a piece of work as an editor than as a writer for you? I mean, were there lessons that you took from always telling your writers, please do this or start like this or whatever, that you heard almost your own voice in your head editing your work? That's kind of a convoluted sentence, but you know
Well,
what I mean.
I would say, I think I learned a ton as an editor, as all of us do as readers. I think that is the best learning ground to being a writer, is reading carefully and thoughtfully. So, because I was editing before I became a writer, I don't honestly know, I can't sort of tell you oh, yes. And now I mean, I don't know how that part of my brain, what I learned just translates, but I'm sure it does. I'm sure it was a very, I don't have an MFA, but this is what I did. And I think it probably helps mostly with structure and pacing in some ways.
Right.
Just sort of knowing what works and what doesn't, or just having a sense of that.
Okay. You're an incredible literary citizen. Can you tell us about Aspen Words and all the remarkable things that you're doing with that?
Yeah.
It's such a great thing.
Thank you. Well, Aspen Words is the literary arm of the Aspen Institute. And we have all sorts of programming, a lot of it in Aspen, where we have a big writing conference in the summer, and we have a writer in residency program for, the 6 sort of spring and summer months into the fall. And then we invite authors out for our winter talk series. And then some of the things that we do more in other places, we have an annual literary award, which I love and is so meaningful to me. It is for a work of fiction that shines a spotlight on a social issue.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it is, we celebrate that each April in New York City at the Morgan Library. It's open and free to the public. But yeah, I feel, as I'm sure you do, so lucky to be in this world, this literary world. Just doing something I feel is important and meaningful every day.
That's right.
And I've met such great people in it. And I just feel lucky because obviously I could have taken some other turn. I did initially in my career. And, I think a lot of it, it's obviously your passion and your drive, but some part of it is just landing in the right place and having some wonderful mentors and opportunities.
Yeah. And I think also, like what you said, it's so important, especially as you get older, to do something that's really meaningful to you and meaningful in the world as well. Which brings me to the next question. There's so much about Trump and politics in the book, and the political landscape is as fraught as the family landscape, though both are highly nuanced. But what I wanted to know is, here it seems like you've made the political really, really personal. Isn't that always the way, though?
I mean, I think it definitely is the way. And weirdly, I didn't set out to write a hugely political book. I mean, I knew I wanted to set it in 2016 before the election, simply because I remember that time.
Oh, it's terrible.
even as I was living that time, and I'm not talking about, that night in November where we found out what we found out, but I'm just talking about even the before. It just felt, it was so fraught, and you felt like everyone knew the ground was shifting. We didn't really know how it was shifting. Obviously, a lot of us thought it was going to shift in some other ways, and there was tension around possibly having a woman in the White House and all the rest. But it was just, I just remember that summer like I remember recent summers with that specificity. And there were just so many moments of angst that I saw. But mostly I wanted that mood to, infiltrate the family, more than anything else. And I think, and
It
the,
did.
and I think it was also, I mean, one thing that was really, I guess fun, I don't know if that's the right word, was the idea that the reader would know so much more than the characters.
Oh,
Because
that's right. That's right. That's absolutely right.
this way, assuming this thing, and proceeding like, that, what they were doing, I can't say, I don't want to give it away, but like in that last chapter, what they were creating, like everyone in that scene was thinking the world was going this way.
Right. Right. I also wanted to ask you in terms of when did you decide to tell the story in the point of view of 5 characters, and how difficult was that to do, or was it a pleasure?
Totally a pleasure. I started out by thinking I was just going to tell it from the 4 main points of view. That would be Adam, his 2 adult children, and the outsider. And then at different points, it swelled to like the therapist had a point of view, the kids had a point of view. Obviously, we got Jenny's point of view later. So it got bigger. And then I took out, I mean, I really would have had, practically everyone weighing in. But what I wanted to do with that was, again, almost this in the same way of the 2016, what you can do with that sort of being so closely in someone's head is to sort of show how we all think we know what's going on with the other people, and none of us ever do.
Right.
I can think you're looking at me funny because I said something inappropriate, whereas you're looking at me funny because you've got a stomach ache or something.
Or something like that. Right. Exactly. Okay, let's take some audience questions. And before I do, I want to tell everybody, don't forget bookshop.org, or walk down the street to your favorite indie. Buy books. You help the community. You help the writer. You help everybody, because reading is so essential. And don't be shy about questions. So we have one. I'm going to pop it up now.
Okay.
Where is it? Okay. What's your writing practice like?
When I'm actually writing, I'm very disciplined. And I don't wait for the muse. I get up early in the morning simply because I've got a busy household. 2 kids, but one just went off to college. So only one now.
No. Rip your heart out of your chest.
Yeah, exactly. But so, the only time that worked for me, because as soon as I used to get my kids off to school, then I'd sit down to do my day job, was, really early in the morning. So I get up around 5, sometimes earlier, get my coffee, sit down, and just write. And I probably have a looser definition. Like, I do not beat myself up. I do not have like, oh, I can't get up unless I have 500 words or anything like that.
Right.
I'm a slow writer. I just do what I can. If it's not going, I do anything in the service of writing for those 2 or 3 hours. So if that's reading, if that's responding to something, if that, but once I get into the groove, those hours fly.
I know. It's when you reach that, I call that the zone, being in the zone. It's just so wonderful.
It's so wonderful. And it's sort of also like the only thing I do totally for me. I'm not running 5 miles like many of you are. I'm not meditating for an hour. I'm writing. And so that way it's kind of my little pleasure time.
Got another audience question. Let's see. What writing advice would you give to your younger self?
I was starting to answer with what writing advice would you give to anyone? And the basic advice is always to read more, just to read. To my younger self, I think I was so trying to figure out how to write Wild Game for so much of my life, even as I didn't realize I was actually trying to figure out how to write it, that I just wish I would have, relaxed a bit about it and just taken some stabs. I think we're much harder on ourselves when we're younger and much, I don't know if that's true. I mean, we're all pretty hard on ourselves at all times, but I think you just have to do it. I think I could get so tense and stop and sit back here, and until you get something out. And I'm not a huge write a trashy first copy, but I do think that's great advice. But once you get something out, that's the only time you can push against something. So just getting anything out and being kind to yourself and not beating yourself up, because nothing comes from here out through your fingers that easily.
Right, right. And we've got another audience question. Do you read fiction when you are reading fiction?
I think she means writing.
Writing fiction. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I do. I read all the time, and I don't actually feel like reading is gonna, put me, if I read a literary book or a thriller, it's gonna change my own writing. I mean, it feels like quite a different part of my brain, but I read fiction. I read memoir, before and after writing Wild Game, poetry, all of it. I mix it up a lot, but I also have to read a lot for my other job. So it's kind of part of my work and pleasure.
Right, that's right. So when you're reading other people's manuscripts, what do you look for?
Well, I'm not editing or publishing anymore now at Aspen
But I
Work.
thought you were doing that with Aspen Words. Am I wrong?
No, I don't really do
Oh,
that.
you don't do that. Okay.
No, no, no. So but
Well, what would you look for if you were?
when I was an editor, I always felt like I wanted both. If there are two things are beautiful writing and a great story, I mean, I feel like story is maybe more important. Like I want to get lost in a story. I wouldn't want beautiful sentences that didn't add up to anything.
Right,
And if I had to
right.
pick, I'd do that, but I want it all. It's kind of like dessert.
All right. So the next question is actually one of my questions, which I ask every single person I interview because obviously it's a question I ask myself all the time.
Yeah.
What's obsessing you now and why?
Oh, that is good. What's obsessing me now? Because I am back in that moment, where I feel like at the beginning of a project where you've got like a little woodpecker going and just like,
Right.
but it's actually not a simple thing to describe because it's sort of a scene that I witnessed. I mean, the quick version is when I was on my Wild Game book tour, and the beauty of book tours is like it's like you are going to a wedding, but you don't know who's on the invite list. So everyone gets
Right.
to you, and you are bumping into people from your past. I mean, just like the last event, my daughter's nursery school teacher who was in New York was on the Cape, and women I waitressed with a million years ago, and just friends of my ex-stepmother. I mean, just like these ways that people get together. But
Wow.
when I was on this tour for Wild Game, I was in California, and this woman, came up and she said, Rennie, which is my nickname. And I said, yes, but I looked at her. I didn't know. Anyway, long story short, she was the daughter of my mother's best friend. And in like 1 nanosecond before I went on stage, we unwrapped this complicated Freudian knot of our childhood. And I feel like that's the thing I keep thinking about, and how would, not to tell that story, but to sort of that kind of interaction and how it can change things so much.
It can change things. It does change things. Do you find that touring changed you?
I found touring to be everyone talks about how exhausting it is, and it is stressful and it is exhausting. I found touring to be remarkably sweet and such a privilege, like such
Yes, it
a,
is a privilege.
and not a privilege in terms of, you're lucky enough to be sent on one or sell books or something. It's just like, it's so nice to talk to people and relate to these people that you would never otherwise sort of cross paths with. Yeah. So changed in as much as I've met people or seen them again, and new relationships have formed. So that always changes you.
That's always changes stuff, and that's always great. Let's see. Is there a question I should have asked that I didn't ask?
I don't know. Is there?
I don't know. There's always like so much to talk to when it's
Yeah.
writer to writer.
Oh,
If do we have any last questions? Let me like take a look.
any last?
I guess
Don't be
we
shy.
don't. Okay, so what I want to say is to everybody out there, again, don't forget to go to your favorite indie bookstore, or you can go to bookshop.org and order Little Monsters, order Wild Game. They're both wonderful, wonderful, wonderful books. And just keep. We'll see you next week. We'll see you next time, I guess. And I want to thank Adrienne for being here. This was totally a delight. Everybody's going to leave, but you, Adrienne, stay here. And we'll see you all next time.